Okay, well today we're going to start a new two-part series entitled Elephants, Addictions, and Garbage in the Pool. Sounds very religious, right?
Yeah.
Okay, listen. This week was a pretty rough week for morale. We took some shots on YouTube this week for some people who didn't really care for our Creation versus Evolution series. And if that wasn't enough, by midweek, I got trampled by a local pastor this week who used to be my friend. Just brutal criticism. It's horrible. I want you to know, as followers of Christ, the people of the world, they're going to take their shots. They're going to attack and they're going to do whatever they can to put us in our place and tell us how stupid we are for believing the fairy tales of the Bible. All right, they're going to scoff and they'll accuse, they'll criticize, and they'll make all kinds of accusations. They'll at some point, in some way, somehow communicate to us that God is not real, that He's not authentic, that He's certainly not worth their personal, undivided, completely loyal submission. According to them, they're going to tell us that such a being or a cause of integrity, justice, and holiness just simply doesn't exist. But you know what? I say that such a being does exist. One whose justice is the mark by which everything else is measured. One whose loyalty through personal sacrifice is beyond criticism. One whose power and holiness is beyond comprehension, whose integrity is beyond reproach. And because I do believe He does exist, I'd be a complete fool to believe that any other being could be more worthy. I want you to remember that when people attack you for your beliefs, they try to put you in your place, you need to remember that when they do this, there's an internal struggle that they're defending. There is something that is threatening their convictions. Aggression is usually a sign of lack of confidence. Are you following me? We have a mission, though. Right? We have this mission to tell everybody that there is hope in Jesus Christ and that they have a choice to make. But Peter reminds us that there's an attitude, an appropriate attitude, in which we're supposed to operate. Look at 1 Peter 3:15-17. But honor the Messiah as Lord in your hearts. Always be ready to give a defense to anyone who asks you for the hope that is in you. However, do this with gentleness and respect, keeping your conscience clear, so that when you are accused, those who denounce your Christian life will be put to shame. For it is better to suffer for doing good, if that should be God's will, than for doing evil. Look at Matthew 10:16. Look, I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore, be shrewd as serpents and as gentle as doves. Now, after considering this, I've come to a conclusion in my own mind and from my own heart that the major difference between people who want to live and act this way and those who really want to follow Christ begins with a very serious issue of pride. Their selfish desire to maintain whatever lifestyle they've chosen, all right? Or they've been submerged in and accosted by the lie for so long, they can no longer consider the truth as an option. Because as far as I can tell, now look, I've been all over the world. And I've met all kinds of people, and along the way there's been some pretty stupid people. But listen, I still can't bring myself to believe that anyone is so stupid to consider the complexity of life itself, not to mention the complexity and the immenseness of the universe, and still not recognize the truth of creation by intelligent design. Look at Romans 1:19-20. Since what can be known about God is evident among them, because God has shown it to them. For His invisible attributes, that is, His eternal power and divine nature, has been clearly seen since the creation of the world, being understood through what He has made. As a result, people are without excuse. Now, after considering all this, it reminds me of a condition called chained elephant syndrome. Have you heard of this? Have you ever seen a full-grown adult elephant in person at the zoo or the circus? Right, you will never truly have an appreciation for the immenseness of one of these animals until you see them up close and personal. A quick internet search says that a full-grown African adult elephant stands between 10 and 13 feet tall. All right? Your basketball hoop, 10 feet. All right? Begins there. And they weigh in somewhere at the heavy end around 26,000 pounds. That's 13 tons. All right, just a point of reference, if you were to take 3 brand new, full-size 2014, fully loaded Dodge dually trucks, and you stack them on top of each other, it still doesn't weigh as much as one of these elephants. You getting this? Okay. Now that you know this about an elephant, have you ever stopped to consider how a single chain wrapped around one ankle, attached to a small peg in the ground, is effective for keeping one of these magnificently powerful and large animals from wandering wherever they want, whenever they want? Amazingly, while anything short of a bus, a bridge, or a building should be necessary to control the strength of one of these, they just stay put. These are victims of what is now called chained elephant syndrome. They take a young elephant and they'll attach it to an immovable post or a tree to keep it from wandering when it chooses. In most cases, right, listen to this, it takes less than 2 months for that animal to come to terms with the fact that no matter what it does, it will never move away from that station until someone comes and undoes it and leads it away. Eventually, it just stops struggling altogether. It will never even try to pull away from as little as a stake, even when it's a full-grown elephant. With as little as a small peg in the ground, the chain around the elephant's ankle reinforces that learned helplessness that was instilled in the little elephant when it was young. It is now completely convinced that it cannot, no matter what it tries, it cannot break free. So it doesn't even try. This is a perfect analogy of people in the world today who just cannot bring themselves to consider the truth of creation by intelligent design or even the existence of God. In spite of all of the observable evidence, and despite the giant lack of evidence that comes from today's modern scientific community that seems to thrive only on proposing theories and concepts for which there's really no proof. Are you following me? These people have remained submerged for way too long in the myriad of other suggested possibilities, all of which have been created just so that God is not the answer and not the plausible solution. Isn't that strange? And just like elephants, they cannot seem to come to grips with the truth that's chained around their ankle that keeps them from experiencing life the way it's supposed to be. Look, elephants were not designed to be held hostage by a chain and a small stake. Just try to keep a wild elephant chained to anything short of a locomotive if it wants to get somewhere else, right? God did not design you or me. He didn't design people to be held hostage by the things that He provided for them to enjoy or to sit around dreaming up ways to justify their choices to enjoy things that destroy them. If they would just take one lucid, logical moment to consider the possibility, it would easily become obvious to them the freedom that has been made available to them and how easy it is to move about in the freedom that's been provided. Now, you may be inclined to insist that I'm the one who's been led astray. Right? I have been brainwashed by my extended exposure to church and the dogmatic principles of religion. Right? Now, this couldn't be any further from the truth. Because as a person, right, as a human being who is a truth seeker by nature, look, I don't have to be right, but I got to get it right. I have examined the evidence of my parents' and grandparents' religion, and I found that presentation to be faulty and lacking. After years of being held captive in this cycle of repetitive, destructive, unproductive nonsense, I walked away full of failure and guilt that only seemed to produce shame and anger, disillusionment and resentment. Listen, I think the church bulletins should have to have warning labels on them, like the FDA requires them on medication. As a religious-minded institution, the following effects may be the result of your attendance, right? Listen, something that people have to understand that we're missing, that's just not happening, right? While God is omnipotent and fully capable of inducing my surrender without so much as a flick upside my head, listen, God is compassionate. And He's so much more interested in my voluntary loyalty than he is in my coerced compliance. Religious church, with all of its rules and its rights and its rigidity, has created this wrong reputation of God, and they're missing out on the truth of who God is and how he really operates. When I chose to walk away, God honored my choice. He didn't have a problem with me saying, you're no longer valid. You're no longer worthy of input into the life that you suffered and died to provide for me. Does that sound like somebody who's domineering to you? No. Without all the torrid details of what my life became, when I walked away, just suffice it to say that I did as those of the world do. And I exercised my right to choose, to do all the things that I thought would define my freedom and that would satisfy the longings within me. Sex, alcohol, language. I mean, I'm talking behavior that was deplorable. These were the products of my choices, the results of my freedom. I risked my own life with unprotected sex, drinking and driving, fighting, running off at the mouth. The choices that I made for my life just created an environment that perpetuated the same choices and the same behavior. At one point, I finally realized that my freedom wasn't so liberating. It's kind of funny how that works. Look, I hated what I'd become, and I hated where I was headed. But I hated even more the prospect of going back to what religion had offered. I wanted better. I suspected there had to be better, but I knew that it wasn't going to exist in any of the methods that I'd already tried. That's when God tapped me on the shoulder and said, there is freedom. There's real, true freedom, but it can only be experienced through submission to me. As it turned out, I wouldn't understand that to be anything but a contradiction until my pride was no longer a factor. Let me see if I can explain to you why this is true. If you have any aspirations at all, you want to get proficient at something, you've probably begun to pursue this through observation or practice or instruction of some sort. If an individual has an interest or a desire to be really good at something, if they're smart, they'll begin to gather all the information available from every resource possible that will help them become proficient at what they're trying to do. Make sense? Education. Whatever case, education is the key to the success, whether that's you watching every dancer on every corner or every back alley, whether it's reading every book or publication on computer programming, taking art or sculpting classes that instruct and inspire and require you to practice, acting classes that reveal technique and require you to perform, classes on psychology or philosophy or writing, mechanical institutes, apprenticeship programs. You understand what I'm saying? Education is necessary. Why is this pertinent, and what does it got to do with church on a Sunday morning? Listen, whatever it is that you desire to improve, it is unlikely that there will be any progress of noteworthy or even noticeable status until there is exposure to someone who is more proficient than you. Do you understand? You have to concede your need. You have to identify your deficit. You have to be humble enough to receive what is necessary to gain what it is you desire. Are you following? There will be no progress as long as there is pride. Would you go to the trouble, to the effort, to the expense, to enroll in a course that, let's say, would teach you to repair small engines or submit a novel for publishing, and then spend the entire class time arguing with the professor or refuse to listen to what they had to say? That doesn't make much sense, right? Some of you look a little suspicious, but listen, for the most part, people who want to improve are much more into receive than to offer. Isn't that right? It's the same when it comes to understanding the method by which you came into existence or discovering the truth about how ultimately everything's going to end. Are you following? If you're someone who cannot or will not acknowledge God as the source of your origin, the reason for your existence, then the difference between us is going to come back to that issue of pride. You're unwilling to concede your need. Unwilling to let go of that choice to maintain whatever that particular lifestyle is, that freedom to choose, right? Or you've just entertained the myth for so long that just like the elephant chained to the stake, you're convinced now that there's no other logical alternative. Yours is the most intelligent, attractive prospect, especially over that rigid, ridiculous, religious path to God? Or is it? Well, let's just begin with how you got here. Are you a person of such deep faith that you believe that the complexity of your existence is the unassisted mutation of microscopic parts of your parents? I mean, can you honestly say that you believe that this is more rationally plausible than you being the result of intentional planning and divine interaction? If you just stop to think for a second about the coordination of intricacies necessary just to bring you into existence, not to mention the planet on which you live, do you see what I'm saying? Look, even if we could remove all the philosophical and the spiritual aspects of this, just toss them out, we're left with two possibilities, right? The fact that the complexity of a life as we know it today came about as a result of, one, random, unassisted mutation that resulted in the manifestation or the materialization of a life form that's capable of thinking and perceiving, creating, improving, whose physiology has limited but very real healing capabilities that even the creation doesn't understand. Or all of what I've just explained to you is really the cause of an effect great enough to bring it into existence. I mean, which of those makes better sense to you? Even if you look at it from just a logical standpoint, which one is more plausible? Okay, look at it this way. Could you walk into a child's room, right, and after discovering a simple but colorful crayon rendition of a sunny day at the park drawn on the wall, are you open to the proposition that it appeared all by itself and out of nowhere? All right? No? You're a cause and effect crowd? Okay. So, what if all of the powers of nature combine to respond to a perceived void on the wall? What about that? There's a cause and effect. No? Why? Because even though you cannot put your finger on an exact moment in time when that child was not sitting in front of afternoon cartoons where he is right now, you know that 2 hours earlier when you were putting clothes in his dresser, the masterpiece didn't exist, did it? And you know there had to be a cause great enough to produce the effect. You will never, ever entertain the idea that even something so simple as a drawing on the wall occurred without a cause. Why is it so beyond the scope of rational, logical thinking to see how an omnipotent, omniscient creator is not only plausible, but necessary to bring about the complexity of a universe, the complexity of a planet, the complexity of you? All right, enough of that. Let's talk about something else. I want to talk about a concept that is understood way less than it is used. Let's talk about this idea of freedom. Is it just as strange to you as it is to me to notice that every example of freedom, the kind that people insist is theirs to exercise, comes with a great propensity for addiction and has a huge capability, possesses this monstrous capacity for physical, financial, and spiritual damage? You ever thought of that? It's kind of hard now to reconcile that label of freedom, isn't it? I'm not even talking about spiritual damage on the level of acknowledging God. I'm talking about the decay and the destitution of a soul. The who we are, the what's inside these bodies. No matter what your belief, your stance, or your opinion on God, His existence, or His involvement, have you ever personally tried to interact with a human whose soul has been ravaged by their freedom to choose? You ever tried to have a conversation, even at a basic level, with a person who can't make it half a day without a drink or a fix? It's not that these people can't communicate. It's that they've now just decided what's the point. They've given up. Dreams, no aspirations. There's no chance of belief they will be free ever again. And it all began with exercising their right to choose. Right? Their prerogative to no longer be saddled or held down by somebody else's religious code or moral ethics or pious attitudes. Certainly not the ridiculous religious nonsense. And I got to give them that. There are some ridiculous rules and rights for religion, but these are not what God desires from or for you. Lots of people also fail to relinquish their choice to choose in other areas. How about food, sex, a language, money? See, all of these things have been provided for us to enjoy, to have. And if we'll use them within the established boundaries, which will include some accountability, oh my, we'll be able to experience them and utilize them for our benefit. But the moment that we believe that our freedom to choose becomes a license to abuse, oh, we're going to learn. Just like so many of the people, that these corrupted freedoms quickly become the chains that bind us and so effectively hold us hostage to a little stake in the ground where we sit hopelessly believing that there's no other option. All right, now this is where we're going to stop for the week. But I want you to come back next week because we're going to continue this discussion and we're going to look very closely at some of these chains that bind us. Sex, language, money. The world is full of people who say that there is no possibility of a God of love because of all the horrible things that exist in the world. All right? Among other things, I'm going to give you an analogy that shows that such logic is just complete lunacy. Come back next week. Don't miss this. Holy Father, we exalt your name. We thank you for your truth. We thank you that you don't ever change, that no matter what happens and swirls around us, no matter whether our lives are in favor or we're under attack, that we don't have to continue fighting a fight that's already been won. God, we thank you for your confidence. We thank you for your truth. We thank you for the fact that if we'll just choose to stay close, that no matter what happens around us, that you've got us, that you have already won, that you already have a path through it. I ask that you let the words of today's message continue to go with us this week. Help us to go back. Look at this fill-in sheet. Make it a part of our daily life. Look at the things that we've allowed into our lives that have chained us to a stake that should not be anything close to capable of keeping us tied anywhere. We ask all these things in Jesus' name so that you are glorified.